But the legacy media hasn't learned a thing, and they have proven that they are totally incapable of change. They lied to you before the election, and they are lying to you now. They learned nothing from what happened on Tuesday, November the 5th, 2024, to the point where MSNBC is about to be sold off to the highest bidder and CNN is losing in the ratings to Newsmax on a daily basis. They are avoiding a story that every single American deserves to hear about, and they are doing this on purpose, and they don't want you to know the truth. Did you know that Joe Biden honored Dr. Anthony Fauci at the White House on Sunday? Probably not, because no one has mentioned it, but it happened. Take a look.
A special thanks to one of the great public health officials, a true hero, who we've led this fight against HIV/AIDS, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Where is Anthony? Anthony, you're a good man. God love you. As my mother would say, God love you, Anthony.
Dr. Fauci is not a hero. He is not a good man. This once revered, almost mythical figure has become a punchline and will go down in history, mark my words, as one of the great villains of the pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans. Did you know, on the same day that Joe Biden was honoring Tony Fauci at the White House, right down the street, a congressional committee released the results of a 2-year investigation into COVID-19, and not a word from the legacy media, because they don't want you to know the truth. And that's because they lied to you about everything. They propped up a weak, infirmed Joe Biden and told the world that he was healthy while letting him get away with not running a real campaign. They pushed mandates on people. They refused to even mention that maybe those same were hurting people. They lied for years, to the point where America, in her infinite wisdom, said enough is enough and put Donald Trump back in the White House. But we can't forget what they did to us. It all started with 14 days to flatten the curve. Then it was masks in public. Then it was 2 masks. Then it was face shields, as masking became the ultimate virtue signal it still is. People put signs in their yards that said, "We're all in this together," and "I wear mine for you." Then they told us to social distance, stay 6 feet apart. We watched Tiger King. Grocery stores put arrows up and down the aisles. People were told to stand on stickers while waiting in line to check out. Toilet paper was sold out everywhere. Schools were shut down for years. The Major League Baseball season was canceled, then the NHL, then the NBA. They put cardboard cutouts of people in the stands instead of real fans. And all the while, we continued to listen to Dr. Fauci. Gyms and churches and playgrounds were closed down, but marijuana shops and liquor stores and fast food restaurants were all allowed to stay open. Millions were told they couldn't go to a loved one's funeral. But when George Floyd died, he had multiple public funerals in multiple states. When Congressman John Lewis died, a public viewing was held in the U.S. Capitol building. Rules for us, but not for them. Graduations were canceled. Anniversaries were canceled. Vacations were canceled. There are a generation of kids in this country today that spent the majority of high school and college wearing masks. Broadway was shut down. Movie theaters were closed. At restaurants, you had to wear a mask while you walked to the table, but you were allowed to take the mask off when you sat down, but then you had to put it back on if you went to the bathroom. And all the while, millions listened to Dr. Fauci. And for some reason, calling COVID the China virus was off limits, even though the virus came from China. But somehow we can still call the Spanish flu, German measles, West Nile virus, and nobody's offended. During the holidays, we were told not to visit our grandparents and not to hug them. Don't you dare hug them. Families were forced to wave to loved ones through the glass at nursing homes. Parks were closed. Beaches were closed. There are photos of priests using squirt guns during baptisms and funerals. Swimmers were swimming with masks on. This really happened. High school bands were wearing masks while playing musical instruments. Basketball hoops were removed from public parks. Skateboard parks were filled with sand. all in the name of public safety. Instead of nature and fresh air, our world became plexiglass and masks. And at one point, Dr. Fauci claimed that COVID-19 came from a pangolin, which is an animal. Then it was a wet market in Wuhan. But don't you dare say that COVID came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a mile down the road from that same wet market where the NIH was funding viruses that were literally being altered to create coronaviruses. You think maybe coronavirus came from the coronavirus lab? And the media still invited him on their shows every week, and millions of people hung on his every word, and still do, despite him being wrong about everything. Common sense was banned in America. Zoom became normal. Zoom for work, Zoom for birthday parties, Zoom with your family. They told us this was fun. It was not. Shaking hands was banned. Elbow bumps were allowed. Airports took your temperature before you boarded a flight. Sure, Donald Trump was president when COVID first arrived in America, but vaccine mandates came from Joe and Kamala. As a result of that, thousands of people lost their jobs for refusing to take this new governmental, experimental. Natural immunity was banned. You couldn't talk about that. Anti-vax cast out of society. It was never about health. It was always only about one thing, and that one thing is control. Control over you, control over your family and your body. And if you got COVID, you were told to quarantine, avoid your family, go down to the basement. Even though the likelihood of that virus killing you was less than 1%. Millions of people missed routine cancer screenings. Millions of women missed routine mammograms. Neighbors telling on neighbors. People were arrested if there were too many cars in their driveways. COVID snitch lines were trendy. And after all of this, after everything they did to us, Congress just completed a 2-year study on what we got wrong during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the media doesn't say a word. And they haven't said a word because they were wrong about everything. Trust the science, they told us.
Infected about 2 weeks ago. It was my third infection, and I had been vaccinated and boosted a total of 6 times.
I'm so sick of that little man. According to the House COVID-19 panel, in a 522-page report, the COVID did not stop the spread or transmission of the virus. Mandates were not supported by science and caused more harm than good. Mandatory lockdowns did not work, and more than 160,000 businesses closed, with 60% of those closing permanently. That's 96,000 businesses that closed forever. The science never justified school closures. They got that wrong, too. And as a result, students experienced higher rates of mental distress and decreased physical well-being. Mask mandates did not work, and social distancing was something they just made up. And ultimately, that led to the closures of thousands of businesses and schools. And they did this to us over the last 4 years. Tony Fauci, in the last 4 years, has been honored with awards. He's got his own bobblehead. He was nominated for Time Person of the Year. He threw out the first pitch at a Nationals game. And every Sunday again, he was invited to go on network television and regale us with basically whatever popped into his head. And for months, we all believed him. He fooled millions of people, but not anymore. Don't forget what they did to us. Don't ever forget, because the second we forget, they're going to try to do it again.